Senator John Kennedy walked into the Senate expecting another routine shutdown debate. But what happened next shocked everyone. Across from him sat Senator Chuck Schumer, ready to shut him down with a single remark. But when Schumer mocked Kennedy on live TV, the room went silent. And Kennedy's response froze him in place. The clip exploded online within minutes, leaving millions asking, "Who's really to blame for this shutdown?" Before we start, tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the debates they never expected you to see. No one in Washington thought this debate would matter. Another shutdown speech, another night of finger-pointing, another round of political theater. That's what viewers expected when the cameras clicked on and Senator John Kennedy stepped up to the microphone. But within moments it became clear this wouldn't be another routine Senate floor moment. Something was different. Even Kennedy looked different. More tired, more fed up, more determined to say what millions at home were thinking. And before the night was over, Chuck Schumer would say something he'd regret, and Kennedy's response would freeze the chamber. "Mr. President," Kennedy began, voice steady but sharp, "I came back here today expecting to hear we'd finally reached a deal. After all, I heard the same predictions you heard. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Well, they were wrong, and I was wrong too." Some senators shifted in their seats. Kennedy rarely admitted he was wrong. But tonight wasn't about pride. It was about pressure. "We've now voted 14 times. 14. Trying to reopen this government," he continued. "And my Democratic friends have voted 14 times to keep it closed." A voice cut in from across the aisle. Everyone recognized it instantly. "That's not accurate, John," Schumer called out. "You know that's not how this works." Kennedy didn't turn. He kept talking, almost as if he expected the interruption. "Millions of Americans are not getting paid," he said. "Air traffic controllers, border agents, military families. Meanwhile, we, Congress, still get our paychecks. How in the world is that fair?" "Because your bill doesn't solve anything," Schumer interjected again. "It's a distraction." Kennedy finally turned his head. "A distraction," he said. "Chuck, people can't pay their rent. They can't buy groceries. And you're telling me asking Congress to share their pain is a distraction?" The room got quiet. Even the reporters leaned in. Schumer folded his hands and spoke calmly, but with a hint of irritation. "Your proposal punishes lawmakers instead of reopening the government. The priority should be getting federal workers paid, not cutting your own salary for television soundbites." Kennedy walked a few steps closer. "Chuck, with respect," he said, "you're not worried about federals, workers. You're worried about losing leverage, and you're keeping this shutdown going because you don't want President Trump signing the bill that reopens it." Schumer's tone sharpened. "That's nonsense. The Republican plan gives the president too much power. He'd pick who gets paid and who doesn't. That's not reopening the government. That's letting him turn the shutdown into a political weapon." Kennedy didn't blink. "So your solution," he said slowly, "is to do nothing at all? To let Americans suffer because you don't like who sits in the Oval Office?" A long pause followed. This was the exact moment, viewers would later say, that Schumer's confidence cracked for the first time. But what he said next, that was the moment that stunned everyone, and we'll get there, because that's the moment that changed the entire tone of the shutdown showdown. For a moment, no one moved. The chamber was still, the kind of stillness that only happens when every person in the room is trying to read someone else's face. Kennedy stood there waiting, arms gently crossed, giving Schumer space to respond. And Schumer, who usually spoke with the certainty of a man who had the votes, the cameras, and the narrative, took a slow breath before finally leaning into his microphone. "John," he said, voice clipped and tight, "if you want to talk about responsibility, then let's talk about it honestly. You can't blame Democrats for this shutdown when it was your party that walked away from the negotiations in the first place." A few murmurs rippled across the chamber. Kennedy didn't flinch. "Chuck," he replied, "we didn't walk away. We walked out after your side insisted on adding everything under the sun except reopening the government. We came here with a simple purpose: get people paid. Your side came here with a wish list. Schumer shook his head. Your bill doesn't open the government. It gives President Trump unilateral authority over federal paychecks during a shutdown. That is not a solution. That is a constitutional disaster waiting to happen. Kennedy stepped forward, closing the gap between them by just a few feet. You know what's a disaster? He said. A TSA agent working 12-hour shifts with no paycheck. A military spouse trying to buy formula while Washington argues about who gets political credit for reopening the government. And do you know what else is a disaster? Congress getting paid during all of this. A beat of silence. Then Schumer leaned back in his chair and spoke just loud enough for the microphones to catch. John, stop pretending this is about fairness. You want headlines. You want to be the guy on the news saying he refused his paycheck. Fine, but don't act like this bill does anything real. Kennedy's eyebrows lifted. Oh, so now it's performative to say Congress shouldn't get paid while the people we represent suffer? Is that where we are, Chuck? Schumer motioned with his hand, impatient. What you're proposing is symbolic. Symbolic doesn't feed families. Symbolic doesn't reopen agencies. Symbolic doesn't negotiate a bipartisan budget. Kennedy nodded slowly, almost thoughtfully. And yet, he said, you won't even allow a vote on it. Because the symbolism scares you. Because if members of Congress actually had to feel the consequences of their inaction, this shutdown would end in an hour. Schumer stiffened. That's not how governance works. You don't coerce lawmakers into negotiating under financial threat. Kennedy shot back instantly. Millions of Americans are negotiating under financial threat right now because of us. Why should Congress be the only group exempt? That landed. Even senators on Schumer's side shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, Schumer's voice stumbled, just a fraction, before he recovered. John, you're oversimplifying a complex situation. No, Kennedy replied. I'm simplifying it enough for the American people to understand exactly who's holding this shutdown hostage. The air tightened. Everyone in the chamber felt it. The debate wasn't just heated anymore. It was personal. And Schumer, visibly annoyed, was about to make the mistake that would turn this argument into the moment viewers kept replaying online. Schumer adjusted his glasses, a familiar gesture he used whenever he felt a conversation slipping out of his control. He leaned forward, resting both hands on the desk, and stared directly at Kennedy as if trying to pull the debate back onto his terms. John, he said slowly, there's a reason serious lawmakers don't push bills like yours. They don't solve problems. They create them. Kennedy tilted his head. Serious lawmakers? He repeated. All right, Chuck. Tell me, who exactly are the serious ones? The ones still cashing their checks during a shutdown? Or the ones trying to level the playing field? Schumer let out a short breath that was half laugh, half scoff. Don't twist this into some morality play. You know better. You've been around here long enough to understand how the budget process works. Kennedy didn't budge. And you've been around long enough to remember when Congress worked for the people and not the other way around. That jab struck deeper than expected. Schumer's jaw tightened. John, he said sharply, maybe if your side could negotiate without turning everything into a political circus, we wouldn't be in this mess. Kennedy took a step closer. A circus? Chuck, this isn't a circus. It's a shutdown. And you're treating it like just another press conference. That was it? The poke that touched the nerve. Schumer sat back, eyes narrowing, tone shifting from irritated to downright dismissive. John, sit down and stop grandstanding, he muttered, not realizing how clearly the microphones would pick it up. You're not helping anything. You're just wasting everyone's time. The room froze. Senators stopped whispering. Staffers looked up. A few reporters exchanged looks like they had just heard lightning strike. Kennedy blinked once, slowly. Sit down, he repeated, his voice suddenly quieter. Chuck, did you just tell me to sit down while we're debating whether Americans get paid? Schumer lifted his chin. John, enough. This isn't the campaign trail. We're trying to govern here. Kennedy shook his head. No, what you're trying to do is shut people up when they tell the truth. And here's the truth. You're blocking solutions because you don't want the president signing the bill that ends this shutdown." Schumer fired back. "And you're pretending your bill does anything other than hand Trump a blank check." Kennedy raised a finger. "It hands nobody a blank check. It hands Congress accountability, something you just told me to sit down for bringing up." A few senators looked to Schumer, waiting, almost dreading his next move. But Schumer wasn't done. He leaned forward, irritation now spilling into every syllable. "John," he said, "you can lecture all night, but the fact remains. Your plan is unserious, your approach is dysfunctional, and your speeches do nothing but delay a real solution." Kennedy let a grin slip, small but unmistakable. "Well, Chuck," he replied softly, "if you think this is delaying things, you might not want to hear what comes next." The chamber stirred. Schumer frowned. Reporters held their breaths, because everyone could tell Kennedy hadn't even started yet. Kennedy let the silence linger just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't flustered. If anything, Schumer's outburst seemed to settle him, like it confirmed exactly what he had been waiting for. "Chuck," Kennedy began calmly, "you keep calling my plan unserious. You keep calling it symbolic. You keep calling it a waste of time. But you still won't answer a single simple question. Why should Congress get paid when the country isn't?" Schumer pressed his lips together. "Because shutting down government pay for lawmakers doesn't solve the problem," he said. "We need to focus on reopening the government, not punishing the people trying to negotiate." Kennedy raised an eyebrow. "Punishing? Chuck, I don't think missing one paycheck is punishment. I think it's perspective. Most people in this country live with the consequences of Washington's decisions. Why should Washington be protected from those consequences?" Schumer responded quickly, almost too quickly. "Because governance shouldn't hinge on personal hardship. That's not how responsible budgeting works." Kennedy nodded slowly. "That's interesting, because right now, governance does hinge on personal hardship, just not yours." A faint gasp slipped from one side of the chamber. Schumer adjusted his microphone. "John, again, this isn't helping. We need bipartisan negotiations, not dramatic gestures." Kennedy took a single step forward, hands clasped behind his back. "Let me tell you what's dramatic," he said. "A Coast Guard service member trying to explain to his kids why the grocery store won't take an IOU. A federal prison guard working double shifts because half his team called out because they can't afford gas. A single mother at TSA trying to choose between childcare and showing up for work without pay." He paused. "That's dramatic, Chuck. My bill is common sense." Schumer didn't look moved. "None of those stories change the reality," he said. "Your bill gives President Trump the power to direct who gets paid and who doesn't during a shutdown. That is dangerous, reckless, and absolutely unacceptable." Kennedy tilted his head slightly, almost curious. "So let me get this straight. You trust federal workers to do their jobs during a shutdown, but you don't trust the president to do his?" Schumer didn't hesitate. "That is correct." Kennedy blinked once. "Well, there we have it. You'd rather keep the government closed than risk the president signing a bill you don't like." "That is not what I said," Schumer snapped. "That's exactly what you said," Kennedy countered, "and the American people heard it loud and clear." Schumer leaned forward. "John, this isn't about the president. This is about preventing abuses of power." Kennedy smiled faintly. "And you don't think shutting down the government for leverage is an abuse of power?" Schumer didn't answer. Kennedy let the silence fill the room. "Chuck, you told me to sit down earlier. I won't. I can't. Not when people are waiting for Washington to grow up." Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards. Senators whispered. Even staffers froze. Because Kennedy wasn't raising his voice. He wasn't grandstanding. He was doing something infinitely more unsettling to Schumer. He was telling the truth plainly, and Schumer knew it. Kennedy's words settled over the chamber like dust after a demolition. Schumer shifted in his chair, clearly irritated, but also aware that the cameras were catching every movement, every breath, every flick of frustration across his face. "John," Schumer began, trying to steady his tone, "this isn't about who grows up. It's about governing responsibly, something your proposal doesn't do." Kennedy clasped his hands. "Then let me ask you something simple. If my proposal is so irresponsible, why won't you even allow a vote on it? Why not let Democrats vote it down and move on?" Schumer tightened his jaw. "Because voting on symbolic bills wastes time we should be using to negotiate a real solution." Kennedy nodded, as though he expected that answer. "Chuck, with respect, do you know what wastes time? Pretending the shutdown will magically resolve itself while we all continue collecting taxpayer-funded paychecks." Schumer shot back immediately. "Your bill is political optics, John. Nothing more." Kennedy smirked slightly. "Optics? Chuck, I'm from Louisiana. Folks back home don't care about optics. They care about whether they can pay their electric bill. They care about missing rent. They care about getting to work in a car that needs gas they can barely afford." Schumer crossed his arms. "And yet, you're up here fighting over congressional pay instead of pushing your party to negotiate a bipartisan funding package." Kennedy's expression sharpened. "Chuck, every time Republicans bring a clean bill to reopen the government, your side votes no. 14 times. 14 opportunities to get paychecks flowing again, and every time Democrats shut it down." Schumer leaned forward, palms open. "Because your party's bills come with strings attached. Strings the president insists on. Strings designed to give him control over who gets paid during a shutdown. That's not reopening government. That's weaponizing it." Kennedy lifted his chin. "And your solution is what? Keep everything closed until every one of your demands is met? Keep federal workers unpaid because you don't want the president to have influence?" Schumer's tone grew icier. "Our solution is a bipartisan agreement, something your leadership refuses to consider." Kennedy arched a brow. "Bipartisan, like when you tell Republicans they can negotiate after they agree to your terms? That kind of bipartisan?" Schumer tilted his head, annoyed. "John, don't mischaracterize our position." Kennedy took a breath, then spoke more softly. "Chuck, people are hurting. They don't care about political framing. They care about opening their paychecks and seeing numbers above zero. And you calling my plan symbolic doesn't change the fact that you refuse to share the pain with the people we represent." Schumer's voice dropped to a near growl. "I'm not here to share pain. I'm here to govern." Kennedy didn't step back. He leaned in. "And I'm here to remind you that you can't govern a country you refuse to listen to." A murmur swept through the Senate chamber like a breeze. Staffers paused mid-step. A reporter in the gallery mouthed, "Wow," to another. This wasn't policy anymore. This wasn't negotiation. This was a collision of ego, pride, and frustration. Two senators facing off in a way Washington wasn't used to seeing on camera. And Schumer, visibly rattled, was about to make the comment that would turn this tense exchange into something far more explosive. The tension in the chamber had thickened into something almost physical. Even people who usually ignored Senate debates were now leaning over railings, whispering to each other, sensing the argument was about to tip from sharp disagreement into something Washington rarely shows: raw, unfiltered irritation. Schumer exhaled through his nose, trying to steady himself. But Kennedy had struck a nerve, and the frustration beneath Schumer's calm surface finally cracked. "John," Schumer said, voice rising just enough to echo off the chamber walls, "you're doing this because you want to be on television. This is a performance. You don't care about the workers. You care about the cameras pointed at you." A wave of murmurs rippled across the floor. It was a low blow. Everyone knew it. Kennedy blinked slowly. "That's what you think this is?" he asked, voice soft but steady. "A performance." Schumer pressed on, not backing down. "You know exactly what I mean. Every time there's a shutdown, every time there's a crisis, you find the nearest microphone and turn the Senate floor into a stage. If you spent half as much time negotiating as you spend crafting these speeches, maybe we wouldn't be here." Kennedy turned fully toward him, hands folded in front of him, expression unreadable. "Chuck," he said, "if this is a stage, it's one you built, and the American people are the audience waiting for someone, anyone, to tell them the truth." Schumer leaned forward, irritation sharpening again. "The truth is your bill is a stunt designed to make you look righteous while accomplishing nothing." Kennedy didn't move. "You call it a stunt," he said quietly, "but you're afraid of it. That's why you won't bring it for a vote, because deep down, you know, Congress would move a whole lot faster if members felt what families are feeling right now." Schumer's temper flared. "Oh, spare me," he snapped. "Your poor family's speeches are getting old. If you truly cared about them, you'd be in the negotiation room instead of here throwing insults." A hush fell. That was a step too far, and the senators on both sides felt it. Kennedy's eyes narrowed just enough to show he heard it. "Chuck," he said, "I'm here because your side walked out of the room the moment the president's name came up. I'm here because you keep refusing every compromise that doesn't give you total control of the narrative." Schumer jabbed a finger toward the desk. "You want to talk about control? Your bill gives the president unprecedented authority to decide who gets paid. That's not protecting workers. That's letting him play favorites." Kennedy shook his head. "That's not what the bill does, and you know it. But here's the interesting part. You keep talking about control, yet you won't give an inch. Not one. The shutdown could end today if you simply allowed a vote." Schumer raised, his voice fully now, abandoning any attempt to appear composed. "I'm not putting a meaningless bill on the floor just because you're obsessed with looking like the hero." That was it, the line that made even Schumer's own staff turn their heads. Kennedy stared at him, unblinking. "Obsessed with being a hero?" he repeated. "Chuck, I'm obsessed with people getting paid. I'm obsessed with doing the job we were elected to do. If that bothers you, then maybe the problem isn't my approach." A rattle of whispers filled the chamber. For the first time, Schumer realized he'd raised his voice too much. He tried to pull back, clear his throat, fix his posture, but it was too late. Kennedy had seen it. The chamber had heard it, and the cameras had captured every second. And now, with Schumer rattled, Kennedy was about to deliver the line that flipped the entire exchange on its head. Kennedy didn't move right away. He let the echoes of Schumer's raised voice fade, let the chamber settle back into a stunned quiet. When he finally spoke, his tone was noticeably calmer than Schumer's, measured, steady, almost surgical. "Chuck," he said, "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly. Not politically, not strategically, honestly." Schumer straightened, bracing himself. "Ask whatever you want." Kennedy nodded. "Do you believe," he began slowly, "that Congress deserves to get paid during a shutdown while millions of Americans do not?" Schumer hesitated. Just for a moment, but long enough for everyone watching to notice. "That's not the question here," he replied. Kennedy lifted one hand. "No, that is the question. That's the foundation of this entire argument. Do we deserve a paycheck when the people we represent are going without one?" Schumer exhaled sharply, trying to hide the unease. "John, you're simplifying a complex situation." Kennedy smiled faintly. "And you're avoiding a simple question." The room tensed again. Schumer leaned forward. "I'm not avoiding anything. I'm saying the issue isn't congressional pay, it's reopening the government. Your bill distracts from real negotiations." Kennedy stepped closer, placing his hand on the lectern directly across from Schumer. "Chuck, this bill could pass the House today. The president would sign it today. We could send a message tonight, a message that Congress isn't above the people who elected us." Schumer shook his head. "A symbolic message solves nothing." Kennedy's voice dropped just slightly. "A symbolic message solved a lot in this country's history, Chuck. Sometimes symbolism is the spark that lights the fire." Schumer rolled his eyes, frustrated. "You want sparks. You want moments. I want policy." Kennedy didn't blink. "Policy without principle is nothing but paper." That line landed hard. Even the stenographers hesitated before typing it. Schumer tried to recover, but Kennedy pressed on before he could. "You accuse me of wanting headlines, Chuck. Let me tell you something. Headlines don't matter to a family wondering how they'll pay for groceries tomorrow. What matters is whether leaders like you are willing to sacrifice comfort for responsibility." Schumer tapped his fingers on the desk, irritated. "John, you are twisting this beyond reason." Kennedy leaned in slightly. "Am I? Or is the truth making you uncomfortable?" Schumer's eyes narrowed. "You're making this personal." "No," Kennedy replied. "I'm making it real." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Chuck, you told me to sit down earlier, and maybe you're used to people doing that. Maybe you're used to Republicans backing off when you raise your voice. But I'm not sitting down. Not when the country is standing in the middle of a shutdown with nothing but excuses coming from your side." Schumer swallowed hard. A tiny flicker of doubt crossed his face, quick but visible, and Kennedy wasn't finished. "You want to talk about dysfunction? Let's talk about it. The dysfunction is pretending that leadership means lecturing everyone else while refusing to look in the mirror." The chamber stirred again, louder this time. Schumer stared at Kennedy, trying to respond but struggling to find the right words, because Kennedy had seized control of the moment, and everyone could feel it. The balance had shifted completely, and Schumer knew it. Schumer drew in a slow breath, trying to bring the temperature down. He straightened his papers, adjusted his chair, and attempted to look composed again. But the chamber had already sensed the shift. Kennedy was steering the moment now, and Schumer was trying to catch up. "John," Schumer began, voice calmer but noticeably tightened, "I'm not questioning your passion. I'm questioning your priorities. We have a responsibility to reopen the government through comprehensive negotiation, not symbolic bills that don't fix anything." Kennedy nodded once as if inviting him to continue. Schumer pressed on. "We're dealing with agencies that need funding, departments that need clarity, families that need stability. That takes bipartisan work, real work, not sound bites." Kennedy leaned slightly against the podium, relaxed, almost conversational. "And I agree with that, Chuck. Completely. Bipartisan work is essential, but let me ask you this. How many bipartisan meetings has your side walked out of since this shutdown began?" Schumer stiffened. "That's not a fair characterization," he said sharply. Kennedy tilted his head. "Then give me the fair one." Schumer hesitated. Again. Just long enough. "We left the room," he finally said, "because the White House refused to negotiate on core issues. That wasn't a meeting. It was a monologue." Kennedy folded his arms. "And your response was to shut the door on every proposal since. 14 votes, Chuck. 14 times we've tried to reopen the government. 14 times you said no." Schumer's jaw clenched. "Because those bills give the president discretionary power he shouldn't have." Kennedy raised a brow. "And withholding pay from Congress gives him power? Because that's the bill you refuse to even debate." Schumer drummed his fingers once on the desk. "It's a distraction." Kennedy smiled just enough to be noticeable. Funny thing about distractions, they usually only bother the people who don't want attention on what they're doing. A couple senators exchanged glances. Schumer saw it. "John," he said, irritation creeping in, "you're making assumptions." Kennedy stepped forward. "No, I'm pointing out patterns. Patterns like this. Every time Republicans propose reopening the government, your caucus uses the word extremist. But when Democrats block a vote, you call it strategy." Schumer's voice hardened. "You're trying to frame Democrats as obstructionists when we're the only ones offering comprehensive legislation." Kennedy responded instantly. "Comprehensive meaning everything you want, nothing we want, and a shutdown that stays in place until we all agree you're right?" Schumer threw up one hand. "That is a gross exaggeration." Kennedy shook his head. "Chuck, it's not an exaggeration. It's the blueprint of every press conference you've held for the past month. And people at home are tired of blueprints. They want results." Schumer leaned forward. "And they won't get results from a bill that punishes lawmakers instead of funding the government." Kennedy lowered his voice. "Chuck, you keep calling it punishment. You know what that tells me? Somewhere deep down you know this shutdown would end a whole lot faster if members of Congress stopped getting paid. A ripple swept through the chamber. Schumer opened his mouth, but no words came out. Kennedy continued. You accuse me of chasing TV cameras, but Chuck, the only reason this debate is being watched right now is because people want to see who's actually telling the truth. The room fell silent again. Schumer swallowed, visibly thrown off balance. And then Kennedy delivered the line that made even the reporters' hands stop over their keyboards. Chuck, he said quietly, leadership isn't about the volume of your voice. It's about the weight of your actions. And right now, your actions are keeping this country shut down. Schumer froze, completely, and everyone saw it. For a long moment, Schumer didn't say a word. His hand hovered over his microphone, but he didn't press it. His lips parted slightly as though he wanted to respond, but nothing came out. The chamber waited, watching him, the silence growing heavier by the second. It was the kind of silence that exposes everything a politician tries to hide. Kennedy didn't move. He just watched him, quietly, calmly, almost respectfully, like he was giving Schumer the chance to say something meaningful, something honest, something that would ease the moment instead of deepen it. But Schumer stayed frozen. Finally, he cleared his throat, shifted in his seat, and forced himself to speak. John, he said, voice lower, strained, you're misrepresenting what's happening here. I am not the reason the government is shut down. Kennedy nodded lightly, as if he expected that answer. All right, he said, then tell us the reason. Tell the American people why their paychecks have stopped. Tell them why 14 opportunities to reopen the government have been rejected. Schumer pressed his fingers together, thinking hard. Because, he said slowly, we cannot accept legislation that gives the president unilateral control over federal payroll during a shutdown. That sets a dangerous precedent. Kennedy leaned forward. And you think the precedent we have right now, millions of Americans working without pay while Congress doesn't miss a dime, is better? Schumer flinched at the phrasing. That's not what I said. No, Kennedy replied, but that's what's happening. Schumer exhaled, visibly frustrated. John, you're creating a false choice. We can negotiate responsibly without theatrics. Kennedy smiled faintly. Chuck, if holding Congress to the same standard as the American people is theatrics, then I'd hate to hear what you call leadership. A few senators on the Democratic side shifted uncomfortably. Schumer noticed. John, you're pushing this too far. Kennedy stepped closer. No, Chuck, I'm pushing it just far enough. Schumer shook his head, trying again to collect himself. You're trying to paint Democrats as heartless. That's unfair, and you know it. We want federal workers paid. We want government functioning, but not at the cost of giving the president unchecked authority. Kennedy let that hang for a moment before answering. So, what you're saying, he said quietly, is that the shutdown continues because you don't trust this president, not because the bills are flawed, not because the proposals don't reopen the government, but because you're afraid of who will get credit for ending it. Schumer's eyes shot up. That's not true. Kennedy held his gaze. Then explain it. Explain why reopening the government is unacceptable 14 times in a row. Schumer lowered his eyes. He didn't answer. Kennedy leaned in slightly. Chuck, he said softly, sometimes the loudest silence in this chamber is when someone knows the truth but can't say it. A pin-drop stillness blanketed the room. Schumer looked up again, visibly rattled. Kennedy straightened his jacket, turned back toward the center of the chamber, and said, The American people deserve better than political standoffs driven by ego. They deserve a government that works. They deserve representatives who don't get paid unless they do their job. That's what this debate is about, no matter how much some try to complicate it. Schumer didn't respond, because he couldn't. It was the freeze that would replay on every network, every clip, every headline. And Kennedy wasn't finished yet. Kennedy stood at the center of the chamber now, not grandstanding, not raising his voice, just speaking with a clarity that carried through every row of seats. His words echoed through the stillness Schumer had left behind. "Mr. President," Kennedy said, addressing the presiding officer, "this shutdown is not a mystery. It is not an accident. It is a choice. And every day it continues is another day chosen by the people in this room." He looked back at Schumer, who had finally regained enough composure to lift his eyes, though not enough to intervene. "But choices have consequences," Kennedy continued. "And the American people are tired of paying the price for decisions made here by people who don't feel the impact of those decisions." He took a step forward. "So I'll ask again, not just to my colleague from New York, but to every senator listening. Should Congress get paid while federal workers do not?" Silence. Not one senator answered. Not one dared. Kennedy continued. "Every agency worker, every service member, every family caught in the crossfire of this shutdown. They don't get the luxury of excuses. They don't get to say, "Washichu, the negotiations are complex." They don't get to hide behind procedure or politics. They simply don't get paid." Schumer shifted, finally pressing his microphone button, but Kennedy spoke before he could. "And before my colleague responds," Kennedy said, "let me make something clear. This bill isn't about helping Republicans. It's not about helping Democrats. It's about helping Americans who have been left hanging while this chamber argues over who should hold the pen on a bipartisan deal." Schumer paused, hand hovering above the button again. Kennedy looked directly at him now. "Chuck, earlier tonight you told me to sit down, and maybe you're used to folks doing exactly that. But I won't, because the people we serve aren't sitting down. They're working. They're worrying. They're waiting." Kennedy's voice lowered, becoming even steadier. "And if this chamber is so afraid of voting on a simple bill to stop congressional pay during a shutdown, then the American people deserve to know why." Schumer finally pressed his microphone. "John," he said, forcing calm into his tone, "no one here is afraid, but we cannot pass irresponsible legislation just to look principled." Kennedy nodded. "All right, then put it to a vote. Let the Senate decide. Let the American people watch, and let them judge who looks principled." Schumer froze again, because he knew what a vote would reveal. He knew what the headlines would say. He knew exactly how many senators, quietly, reluctantly, would vote yes if forced to go on the record. And he knew Kennedy knew it too. Kennedy closed the moment with a final line that would headline every political show before midnight. "Leadership isn't about who wins the argument. It's about who shows up for thee. People who can't show up for themselves. And tonight, Mr. President, I intend to show up." The chamber fell into a heavy, reflective silence. Schumer lowered his gaze. Reporters typed furiously. Cameras zoomed in on the stillness between the two men. The shutdown wasn't ending that night, but something had changed. Kennedy had forced the country to see the debate for what it truly was. Not a policy dispute, not a procedural fight, but a question of responsibility, integrity, and who in Washington was willing to take the first step toward accountability. The freeze moment, the one that spread across news feeds within minutes, wasn't about embarrassment. It was about truth landing with so much weight that even a seasoned senator like Chuck Schumer couldn't move.